welcome to Digging for Truth, where we explore the reliability and truthfulness of the Bible, starting in the book of Genesis. On previous episodes, we've had numerous guests who were prominently featured in the film Is Genesis History? The sequel to that movie, Mountains After the Flood, is now available, and the director, Thomas Purifoy, is here to give us unique insights into the film. Thomas, welcome back to Digging for Truth. Good to have you on the show, man.
Great to be here again. Good to see you, sir.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. As a film director is a busy man. And so we're going to jump right into our discussion, Mountains After the Flood. If you could tell us maybe some key reasons for the title and for the emphases that are in the movie, the big picture vision you have for this.
Yeah. So the film, it's funny, I was talking to Dr. Steve Austin, who's featured in it. We were talking about different ideas for the film, and he said, I ran this by him, and he said, hey, I like this title because the title gives it a place, it gives it a time, it gives it an action. And that's kind of what the film's doing, is we're looking at what was going on in the world after the flood, and particularly the reforming of a lot of the landscape of the earth. It's this curious idea that many of the high rugged mountains we see in the world, a lot of the mountain chains like the Rockies, the Andes Mountains, the Himalayas, a lot of these mountain chains were never really eroded away. And a lot of creation scientists will observe that these mountains formed really at the end of the flood and just after. So there are fascinating evidence that there was a flood, but that there was a lot of recent mountain building going on in the earth. And even the conventional view, very curiously, we read a number of books on this, even in the conventional view of earth history, would consider these, obviously within millions of years, but far more recent than other mountain chains in the world. And curiously, they all were coming up about the same time in earth history.
That's good. Now, one of the things that features prominently in the film, and I thought this was really important because of one of the reasons the misconception out there is that creation scientists don't do real science, okay? That's a myth that's out there. And really a central focus is the work of the geologists in the field. Tell us a little bit about sort of the philosophy behind doing that and how you saw that play itself out in the production of the film.
Well, it's funny. When we did our first film, one of the things that had always annoyed me was a lot of people had said, these creation scientists, they're not smart guys. They're not guys that do, they don't know what they're talking about. So I really wanted to kind of put that to rest with our film Is Genesis History. You may not agree with what their findings are, but no one after watching it, I think, would ever say that these are uneducated, unintelligent people, that they're very smart, they're very well educated, they just have a different paradigm they're working from. Well, then one of the second things that came out that I had heard is that people began to really complain that, well, they may be smart guys, but they're not really doing good science. So this is not, the scientific method. They're just kind of making this stuff up. So in 2017, basically the year we released the film, Dr. Snellings and Dr. Whitmore were going to the Grand Canyon on this research trip. Andrew had been working on this for quite some time, Andrew Snelling, and we received the material. Basically, we had given some advice to the filmmaker about how to film in the canyon. This had been a part of an unusual project, not to get into some issues of permitting and some worldview discrimination that they were basically subject to. But the result was we received all of these hours of footage and literally just put it on the shelf. This was 2017, and we were in the middle of other projects. So when I took it back off the shelf in late 2019 and started looking and saying, is there a documentary here? And first I was like, okay, is this a buddy film? How do I look at this? And then in 2020 happened, and we realized we couldn't do anything. And as I started to study the footage, I realized really this is a film that explores the research project. And we had the opportunity of doing something we couldn't do in our first film. And that is basically showing how creation scientists do their work. And so by capturing both the we didn't quite have the planning, but we could, obviously that's not totally exciting, but you can actually see them actually gathering data. We were very able, and they're very careful. And so we had the filmmaker who did this, a guy named Hilton Metzger, who was with Alliance Defending Freedom, did a fantastic job capturing all this. So going through all those details, then we were able to go and capture Ray Strom making the thin sections up in Canada, and then bringing it all the way home to have an analysis of this. You had all of the steps in the scientific process of, they had a theory that he wanted to work out. They actually were able to go and collect data to test the theory. They put it through a series of processes and then analyzed the findings and said, okay, is this accurate or not? And so in that case, it was a great opportunity to show exactly how creation science works, which is, to be honest, it's just the traditional scientific method.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I learned a lot from that, from the field work. Being familiar on my end with archaeology and having been on 3 digs,
right,
and digging at Shiloh with my colleagues, it's the same kind of thing. But seeing what the guys do in the field to collect rock samples and the whole process was highly educational. Now, you did mention, Thomas, paradigms. And this is one of the big things that you guys emphasize, not just in the first film, but this is also in the second film. Let's talk about the importance of paradigms as it relates to the evidence, because the rocks are the rocks. The issue isn't the rocks, the issue is the interpretation of them. Please flesh that out for the audience, if you would.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the first film. I was influenced by, Thomas Kuhn's work on the structure of scientific revolutions, where he introduces this idea. And a lot of it is through his research of the history of science, but he introduces this, really is the recognition, is that in order to make sense of all the data that's out there, and let's be honest, there's far more data than anyone can pull together in our own very limited minds. We basically create maps or models, which he refers to as paradigms. And these can work at, different levels, but they help to kind of pull all the data. They put certain data aside, say, this is the data I'm accepting, and this seems to be an accurate view of the world. And these paradigms are things that he actually goes further and wrote a second series of essays that most people may not have read, but called Further Thoughts on Paradigms, where he digs in and says, let me go really help define this, that you can have really large views of paradigms that will sit over a whole science, a whole idea, maybe even like an evolutionary paradigm or a paradigm that Earth is old. But you also can have a paradigm where you're looking at most disciplines have views that they have that are very internal to them. So geologists have paradigms, medical doctors, and then you'll have them even in subsets, a sedimentary geologist, things that a group of people have generally agreed, this is how we're going to interpret this data. So in this case, what we've realized is that these paradigms are very controlling for everyone. And what I would look at them as is maps, that they are trying to map data out. And it's important to realize that there is a created world. There's a reality out there that's more complex than us. And so that we're constantly using these. My interest is be able to say that the paradigm that has been a reigning paradigm for so long, for instance, that the Earth is very old, that the evidence within the Earth, the data of these sedimentary layers, they represent, hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. That's a paradigm that I would say is being, it's taking aspects of the data, and it's also imposing certain ideas on it. I would say creation science is the same way. It takes the data and says, well, actually, maybe these layers of the rocks, perhaps because we look at them in terms of, in this case, the folds, these incredibly large folds of the rocks that supposedly are very old. We think that actually is evidence that doesn't really fit this older paradigm, but actually is a better fit within a paradigm that the Earth is actually much younger, and that the Bible did have a global flood. And so again, they take the data and say, well, actually, these pieces of data would be an anomaly and not seem to fit in this paradigm, but seem to fit better. And so it's really more about taking pieces and putting them into a model and saying, does this fit? Recognizing that there's lots that both sides struggle to understand. There are a lot of things that no one quite fits, and that, let's be honest, there's no paradigm scientifically that is absolute. Which kind of goes back to me being an archaeologist. You're looking and kind of constantly dealing with paradigms with this data, but that we look at history as being a different way to have knowledge. I mean, we fancy, the epistemological foundation, but that the idea that someone tells us this is what happened is actually a different way of coming to some level of truth than using the scientific method. And I would actually argue that the historical method is actually a far better way
Yes.
to learn about what happened in the past
That's excellent.
Sorry, scientific.
Sorry to interrupt you on that. We are going to go to a break, and now I want to pick up on some specifics, some of the data, like you mentioned folds in the rocks, and that's a really important part of the movie, and we'll do that right after this message.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're talking about the movie Mountains After the Flood with the director, Thomas Purifoy. Okay, Thomas, you gave a great exposition on paradigms, and the key, one of the central parts of the movie was talking about rock folds, bended rocks in the Grand Canyon, other places in the world too, but where the research was conducted. Tell the audience about that and what the meticulous detail went on with the study of those at the microscopic level and what the results were.
Absolutely. This is kind of the center point of the film. It was the center of Dr. Snelling's research. So to take a cue back from our first film, we interviewed Steve Austin. He discussed that there are basically layers of sedimentary rocks that kind of cover the earth. And if you imagine them kind of like the skin of the apple, there are places, and they're kind of stacked up one on top of the other, there are places, in many places, where that skin seems to be wrinkled. And in a sense, the rock has kind of been folded. Now, again, relatively speaking, we're very, very small. Some of these rocks that have been folded, these are layers of rock, are hundreds of feet wide, and where the rock literally will go up and down and just smoothly fold. So these particular folds some of them are found at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Now, what's interesting about the Grand Canyon is it's kind of this cut out of the earth. Imagine kind of a cut into the apple skin. And what it does is it reveals all the layers going up. And so the layers at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, the sedimentary layers, under the conventional paradigm, would have been 550 million years old. What's interesting is those are the layers that are bent. And in fact, those bends, if you start stacking the layers up, the layers are bent all the way up to layers that are around 70 million years old, 70, 65 million years. So meaning apparently all these layers were bent simultaneously. Well, most people on the both the conventional and in the creation side of things would say these layers were bent during what was called the Laramide mountain building event. And so the official name is the Laramide orogeny, but this is when the Rocky Mountains and the huge mountain chains in the West were being pushed up. And there was a lot of tectonic, those are earth moving activities that are happening at this time. Well, what's interesting is that if the paradigm that says these layers were all very old, and so imagine the bottom layer to be 550 million, and you're going to keep going up. You may have some that are 400 million years old, some that are 300 and 200. Most people would say, and even the conventional geologists would say, the rock sediment is going to dry out. It's going to be hard. And so the assumption would be is if you had tectonic movements, you would have faulting. You would have the rocks break because they are hard. It's like what you see concrete in a street. Things get pushed up underneath it and then they crack. Yes. They're not soft. However, the creationist view is that those layers were soft, were laid down during the flood rapidly. So at the end of the flood, when there was tectonic movements, as in many cases the ocean basins were dropping and the continents were rising up some, what ended up happening is it did create layers, but it would make sense that all those layers would be folded together smoothly because they were still soft and the sediment was still soft. And that was what Andrew wanted to go in and study, because his argument or his view is that if you look inside the layers themselves, in this case, the very lowest layers, there would be evidence microscopically of whether the layers were soft or were they hard, had they solidified when they folded.
Yeah, I thought it was great in the movie how they got into the technical details, but basically, in order for a millions of year old rock that's really hard to bend, it would have to be under heat and pressure. And so
Yes.
right, microscopically, you can look whether it's metamorphic rock or sedimentary rock. And the result was sedimentary rock in spades based on the microscopic analysis. And
that was their view, is that, yeah, it's an interesting the way they did this. And it's, we kind of struggle with this part of the film because it's so complex. I mean, it's not, it was a film where you kind of have to understand point A, point B, and point C. And if A, B, and C are together, well, then therefore D leads to E. So it's a little more of a logical film in the order of it. But what was very interesting at a very simple level is that, yes, for rock that is very old and hard to be able to have some sort of bending, the idea would be that there would be under some heat and pressure that would enable the sedimentary crystals of basically the sediment pieces, the grains, to slowly move and be able to reform. Now, I gotta be honest, I mean, there's some very interesting physics we did not get into, which is the idea is that, yes, you could bend something, but how do you get something to bend literally in 180 and backwards? These were some things we began to explore in some of our secondary stuff with a structural engineer who was like, this is really strange. Like, concrete is very similar in what it does, and we can, lay concrete down, but you can bend it a little bit, but there's points at which you can't bend it at all.
Yes.
So I would say that even from a physics perspective and just kind of common sense, you're like, these are enormous folds that aren't just in the Grand Canyon. They're in, throughout the Rocky Mountains. One of our famous shots is a shot of Mount Kidd at the end in the Canadian Rockies. But when you get down to it and realize that Andrew took samples of rocks that had not been folded, so flat, and then that same rock layer he took later on, maybe 5-6 miles away, and it had been bent. What they noticed is that the rock samples at basically these thin sections, it's basically a little slice of rock. The thin section from the flat rocks and the thin section from the folded rocks were basically indistinguishable. And so you would have assumed that, well, if this had undergone some kind of physical transformation, even at a molecular level,
you would see that.
You'd see it.
Yeah.
And it was very, everything was just basically the same. And so there were many other lines of evidence, like, okay, what did the crystals look like? Had the crystals reformed? Was there any evidence of heat and pressure? He just didn't see it. And so this is what he ended up doing is he's got, we were kind of the tip of the iceberg. Andrew has written technical paper after technical paper after technical paper. I think he's like on 7 or 8, where he takes all this data, and these are like 90 to 100 page papers. And he explains the reason they're so long is because people on the conventional side will say, well, yeah, that's your view, but, and he said, look, I got to lay out all the evidence. So
yes.
and it wasn't one fold, he looked at 4 different folds. And it kept coming up with the same thing, the same evidence.
Same thing. All right. Thank you for that, Thomas. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come right back for our final segment. ABR is excited to announce the publication of Volume 2 from our excavations at Khirbet el-Maqater. The volume details archaeological remains from about 350 BC to the 8th century. This includes a New Testament village that may have been visited by Jesus. Over 400 pages of analysis, photos, and maps. You can pick up a copy today by visiting BibleArchaeology.org. Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Thomas Purifoy, the director of the film Mountains After the Flood. All right, Thomas, thanks for giving us an explanation about those folds in the movie. It's just fantastic the way you guys lay that out and explain that, even for a person who's not a trained geologist. I want to talk a little bit we're talking about mountain uplift after and near the end of the flood. Some people might be saying, well, is there anything in the Bible that talks about that? Maybe you could give us a quick tutorial on that.
Well, a lot of creation scientists would put this event, the mountain raising event, at the basically it happening during the end of the flood. Now, interestingly, when you start talking about a creation scientist, they'll observe that much of what you see in the Bible is giving you kind of the perspective of a man, in many cases, a man like on the surface of the deep. And so you don't always know what's going on underneath it. But there are some very interesting hints in the Psalms and in other places where it talks about this idea of God, covering the earth like with the flood waters, but that he basically rebukes them, and that the mountains rose, and that the waters flood, and that he retreated to the places that he had assigned them. And so what is interesting is that there are a number of places in Job and in the Psalms that really do talk about tectonic events reforming the earth. And that's what's kind of interesting when you start looking at the Bible, is God is not always interested to give us all the details,
right?
But he also, because he's acting in the real world, he often gives us sufficient details to say, look, you're smart, figure it out. The idea, he doesn't tell us exactly how the stone was rolled away, but it's pretty easy to get a picture of a huge stone rolling away from a grave. We know what a stone is. We know what these things like. We know what an ocean looks like, and imagine an ocean covering the earth and then coming off of it. That's the job of these creation scientists, is begin to help us picture what that would look like in reality.
One of the major things in the film, too, that's brought together is these events of sedimentation, which were worldwide and very complex, and tectonic activity near the end of the flood. Tell us, one of the models that even secular scientists agree is about plate tectonics, except the speed of it we would disagree with from a creation standpoint. Give us a little tutorial on that, if you would.
So, yeah, plate tectonics is just the idea that the earth, basically the top layer of the crust is divided into and broken into a series of plates, and that these plates move over time. And so, again, these are things that people agree with. What you'll find is that the plate margins, in certain places, you have convergent places where one area goes in underneath the other. You have them when they crush together. Again, these are things that are agreed upon. What's disagreed is the speed at which they happen. And so, in terms of the mechanism for the flood, the idea is that these plate tectonics happen catastrophically. And so the motions of which the plates are moving is much, much faster than in the conventional paradigm. And the result, though, is that mountain building and major catastrophic events would be the result. And so you will see, Steve Austin talks about this. He actually talks about it's his mnemonic, Steve, but you have sedimentation, so things being laid down. You have tectonics, things getting pushed up and moved around. You have erosion, so you have things being cut out. So we talk about, an example of this is the Mississippi Valley, and that how big it is and how many streams are what are called underfed. That clearly there was much more erosion in the past than we have today, and we looked at places like that. You have volcanism. So all this wasn't talked about as much in the film. It's the idea that, basically huge sections of the earth have actually been covered with lava. Think about the Columbia basalts. And then for Steve, again, in talking about this, Steve Austin, his the last E is basically exponential decline. So the idea is that during the flood and after it, you had enormous amounts of energy on the earth that would enable us to do things like raise up mountains and cut out valleys. That energy has dissipated, and so we don't see those actions happening today, which explains why the biggest storms we have, tsunamis that hit places like Japan and Indonesia and are horrific, are still very, very small when compared to what the landforms that we see just by looking around us, even in North America. Huge things have been cut out, and this has even been recognized by guys like Derek Ager and other modern, what are called neo-catastrophists, who, although they certainly wouldn't support the flood, they would very much say what's going on today is not what was going on in the past. And there were major catastrophes. As a flood geologist and as creation scientist, we would say that, well, actually the better explanation is the flood brought about the energy to do this, and catastrophic plate tectonics was one of the mechanisms that enabled that movement and the reforming of the earth to happen.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, Thomas, believe it or not, we've run out of time. But I'm just grateful for you just sharing just a little bit of the perspective of, as the producer of this film, is an enormous accomplishment. And I just know us here at ABR and those who are interested in the early chapters of Genesis, we can't even come close to expressing our appreciation for all the work you've done. I appreciate it, man.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being on the show. Friends, thank you for watching Digging for Truth. If you have a further interest in exploring the film, we ask you to go out and purchase a copy of it. You can download it from the Is Genesis History website. It is a phenomenal film. You'll learn how the scientific research is done. You'll learn about paradigms. You'll learn about reasons why you can believe that the Noah's flood really took place in the way that the Bible describes it. We thank you for watching Digging for Truth and for supporting our show.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.